Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webcast, Website Personalization, Why You Can't Afford to Not Get Personal, brought to you by VentureBeat Insight and Autopilot. I'm Wendy Schuchart from VentureBeat, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. First, this webcast contains audience polling. Complete the polls when they appear and hit the Submit button. We thank you in advance for your participation in these polls. The slides are going to advance automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Attachments button above the video window and click, there's a couple of attachments in there, but today's presentation deck is the very top one. You can also watch this again on demand after we're done recording. So if you miss something or want to back up, you can certainly do that. It's available about an hour after we're done recording. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our help guide by clicking on the help link inside the Rate This box. You can also participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the live webcast. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text area in the video window. It's a little button above the video window there, and then click the Ask a Question button. At this time, we also recommend that you disable your pop-up blockers. And now we're going to move on to the presentation. First, I'm going to be bringing in our esteemed panelists. We have Andrew Jones from VentureBeat Insight. We also have Amber Whiteman, she's the VP of Client Service from Metia, and Jeriad Zoghby. He's the Managing Director of Global Personalization at Accenture. And first, we're going to bring in Andrew. Andrew is an analyst at VentureBeat Insight focused on the marketing technology and personalization areas. Before joining VentureBeat, he also worked at Yahoo Startups, research think tanks, digital agency iCrossing, and was most recently an analyst at Altimeter Group. He also served in the Peace Corps. We also have with us on the phone Amber Whiteman. She oversees Metia's U.S. Client Services team. Amber has experience in all facets of account service, including project management, account management, and account direction for clients such as Microsoft and AT&T. Amber's passion for digital marketing is demonstrated in measured results that she delivers to each campaign. And we also have Jeriad Zoghby. He has a PhD, and he's the Managing Director of Accenture Interactive, the global lead for personalization and media optimization. He's also the inventor of Accenture's artificial intelligence technology for advanced audience planning, a patent co-inventor, author of multiple industry papers, and a former adjunct professor at the Graduate Business School at the University of Texas at San Antonio. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and then we'll bring the panel in a bit. Andrew, take it away.
All right, Wendy, thank you so much. So first of all, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to VentureBeat Insight. We're a new kind of research firm, and it's part of VentureBeat, which many of you will be familiar with as a media outlet. But VB now does more than just news. It's tech news, events, and now research as well. And I started researching this topic of personalization initially with a report about the how of personalization across a variety of channels. It wasn't channel specific, but it looked at what is personalization, how does it work today, how do you do it, and how is it being done across different channels. But today we're talking about web personalization. Today's webinar is based on this report, which is about web personalization and really how a variety of companies are increasing conversions, boosting retention, and a variety of other metrics and KPIs using web personalization. So here's the topic today, web personalization, why you can't afford not to get personal. And quickly, just an agenda of what we want to talk about today, very short. So first of all, what are we talking about with web personalization? A quick definition, some details of ROI and what kind of results people are seeing. Comparing different approaches of how you can use web personalization, how you can implement it in different ways. Audience segments to focus on, and then the right data, how you collect the right data, how you find the right data, how you determine what that data is. So first of all, why is personalization such an important topic? Really what we're talking about is scale. If you have just a few customers, like here, then it's really not that hard to get to know them individually, to cater to their preferences as individuals. But what happens when you get a much larger number of prospects and customers? Well, it quickly gets out of hand. So personalization lets marketers be relevant at scale. And customers, on the other hand, have increasingly come to expect personalized offers, messages, experiences. We as individual customers have become really quite lazy, and if we don't see what's relevant to us, we know that there are relevant experiences for us in other places. So we come to expect it. We go to competitors' sites if we're not finding relevance on the site that we're on. We have more options than ever, and truly it is making us lazy. And as a result, personalization has become, we've found, the single most important capability for marketing efforts. And if you read a variety of marketing and marketing technology studies recently from a variety of different sources, you'll see that personalization has become either the top or one of the top priorities for marketers today. And web personalization, as you can see here in our own research, is dramatically lifting a variety of KPIs. We're seeing web personalization affecting bounce rates, time on site, page views, conversions, and a variety of other critical success metrics. And in fact, we found that 87% have seen a lift of at least 5% in their most important metrics. And then 2 in 5, just under 2 in 5, 39%, have seen an increase of at least 20% in their most important metrics, which is really impressive to see that kind of lift across the board. And here are the metrics that marketers are focused on when they are employing web personalization. Yes, conversions are important, and you would expect that, but there are more nuanced metrics than, say, email as a channel. You have metrics like return visits and time on site that are being improved as well. But why web personalization specifically, especially because email does remain the top marketing channel for the majority of marketers? Well, there are two main reasons. For one, it's a step higher in your conversion funnel, and far more prospects are hitting your website than ever give you an email address in the end by signing up for a newsletter or making a purchase. And then secondly, there's so much more data that's available in web interactions, especially compared with email engagement. If you think about email, you get open rate, click-through rate, maybe a few more details, but there's so much more that we can get from web and also in mobile interactions. The engagement level is so much higher in terms of the data that we can collect. And web personalization is also not limited to the biggest companies anymore. I mean, this is what everyone thinks about, right? It's Amazon.com. And yes, Amazon and Nike and Netflix, we recognize these sites are personalizing our experiences for us. But we are now seeing a democratization in web personalization capabilities. It's just that most people aren't aware of what the options are that are out there. And even if in our own survey, we surveyed 436 marketers for this research, doing some form of web personalization, take a look at how many of them are from smaller businesses. Yes, there are some from enterprises and very large enterprises, but a lot of these in our survey are from smaller businesses. And if you think about the slide, the results that I showed a moment ago in terms of those success metrics, it's not just large enterprises that are benefiting from web personalization. It's across the board. We also looked at the majority of our survey respondents were B2B. 56% were B2B compared to the rest being B2C. But there's a pretty healthy mix across the board there as well, especially because most marketers that were using web personalization capabilities in the beginning were B2C, especially in retail, and we also saw a lot of publishers using them. And in a different previous survey of a little over 500 marketers using some form of personalization across the board, these were the most common channels being used for personalization. And as you can see, email dominates today, but considering that many of those doing email personalization are just doing some kind of dynamic field insertion, like inserting your name, that's really not saying very much. And if you take a look at this next slide where it's web that's highlighted, the number of marketers using some form of web personalization is not insignificant, and it's actually growing quite a bit. So I'd like to get my esteemed guests here involved and get some conversation going. So let's talk a little bit about how you achieve personalization. And there's kind of a whole spectrum of what's possible and how. And in particular, I want to ask about a more manual kind of rules-based approach that is typically used for segmentation compared with using potentially a more automated approach based on machine learning or artificial intelligence that can personalize to a greater degree down to more of an individual level. Now, how should we think about or compare those two, and does a certain approach work better than some other for certain companies or certain situations? And Amber and Jared, perhaps you can give us a little more background on yourselves first, and then dive into the question.
Sure. I'll go ahead first. This is Amber. I am a Vice President at Metia. I focus on the client services aspects of our business, and so we work with small to mid-size and then also enterprise organizations, and we help them to choose the best digital solutions for their companies. And so my perspective really comes from how we're helping our clients stay in front of trends and continue to be innovative.
Got it, thank you. And then Jared, if you can give us an introduction, and then maybe we'll start with you and go back to Amber. And Jared, you may be on mute.
Do we
Possibly.
lose Jared? Well, let's pop over to Amber. Amber, how should prospects compare prescriptive, manual, and rule-based or adaptive, automated, and predictive personalization methods? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it's cliche, but there is no one-size-fits-all approach to anything, and that includes personalization. You really have to consider what you're ultimately trying to achieve. And I think something that was really great that was in the insight report that Andrew put together talked about a hybrid approach. It's not in use a whole lot right now for web personalization, but it is really a great approach for most businesses. Of course, a 50-50 split between manual and machine-based learning isn't going to work for everyone. You may think you know your customers pretty well and set up your rule-based segmentation for personalization up front. However, if you're able to employ some machine-based learning to your experience, then you can utilize that to continue to learn more and more about your customers and in turn customize their experience based on the behavior you're tracking. On the flip side, you may not have the resources at your disposal to do manual personalization. Maybe you don't think you know enough about your customers based on their existing behavior to effectively deploy manual personalization. So in that instance, you can start out with machine-based learning and begin to collect that information while still providing that personalized experience to your customers from the onset. Ultimately, as I mentioned, I think the right mix is somewhere between the two, not something completely automated and based on machine learning, but not something that's completely manual either. It helps you be more scalable and not have to rely truly on the resources that you have available to you. It helps you strike a nice balance where you can be automated and flexible, yet nimble and quick to react to data to help continuously improve on the experience you're offering to your customers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'd love to get Jared's perspective if he is on.
Can you hear me now, Andrew?
Yep, I can hear you perfect.
Thank goodness. I was talking before, it just wasn't coming through, so it was quite frightening, to be honest. I did dial back in. And unfortunately, I missed some of what Amber said, and that's a shame because I actually was very curious on that. Quick background. So personalization at Accenture, we do actually focus on the right-hand side of that chart with the company. So we're more of an enterprise and large enterprise kind of focus. It's really often about bringing companies back down the spectrum of what small businesses are often very good at, right? If you think about a lot of your small businesses, they're really good at the offline personalized experience. They recognize you, they remember your preferences, and they help you make decisions, right? Whether it's a recommendation and being very relevant about the time of the year or what's going on, or if you have your kids with you. And as big businesses start to scale and become very operationally focused, they lose track of that. And so a lot of what personalization that we're trying to do is bring that back, especially in the digital experience, to handle those things, and we call them the 4 R's: remember, recognize, remember, recommend, and relate. And those are the things that we feel like are critical, especially on the enterprise side, to doing personalization correctly. And before I answer that question, I did want to comment your chart, which I think is extremely enlightening if people weren't paying attention. The fact that 80% of emails got some form of personalization, and yet the web content and the e-commerce are not, should be a big warning sign. Because as you start to build the business case to get the investments to continue to scale up personalization, and that's what a big focus for me is scale, that's actually where you get your financial business case. Because email, as great a job as you can do on it, is still a demand generation exercise. And so people are often argue, especially in the large enterprises, was it my email? Were they just going to come anyway? Was it my TV ads? Was it my search engine marketing? And so it becomes a complex decision. It's not to say that you shouldn't be doing it. You absolutely should. It's just that if you don't tie it back to the conversion or the engagement side of that equation and close that loop, you miss out on actually building the business case to continue to scale this. And so at Accenture, under personalization, the area I run, we have a marketing side of personalization, which is about generating demand, converting it, and measuring it. Very campaign-oriented, often very time-sensitive. And then we have an experience side, which is often related to content management and e-commerce, where you're trying to engage people. And so it's everything from on-site search, right, helping them find what they're looking for, recommendations, helping them make a decision, and even the design of the page, right, which is the refinement of that experience as it flows through. So that's a little bit of a background on myself and the way we kind of view it. To this specific question, it's interesting. Most companies have evolved or are trying to evolve from rules-based to the adaptive. I would actually argue as they mature, it's usually going to be a mixture of both. And the reason being is that what you end up doing is you end up repositioning the rule-based, not as a true recommendation engine, because I don't think that's its strength. I think it's a mistake. Leveraging all the stuff we know about someone, which is what they expect nowadays, thanks to companies like Amazon and Netflix. Leveraging everything we know about them to make their decisions easier, to make them more confident decisions is what they expect. However, there are still going to be needs for very prescriptive recommendations, very prescriptive personalization, because I may have certain restrictions in a region. I may have certain inventory levels in the store that I'm going to recommend to you, but I know you're actually scanning the QSR at the shelf. These are things that need to overlay with it. And so the way we look at it is more of an orchestration model. You're going to have recommendations, but the truth is something like a personalized recommendation by itself is not sufficient. How you curate that in the experience, how you overlay these prescriptive objectives, and then often how that stuff is managed as an overall experience is critical. So I know we'll get into some of that later, but I actually think the evolution is not one or the other. It's about repositioning the rules-based in the role that it's best for, a little bit more of an orchestration role, and then the recommendations being much more of the automated and predictive, because again, there's nothing more frustrating, whether it's a small business or a large business, for me to have to constantly remind you what I do, what I like, and it basically is just showing that you're not paying attention. So that's how I would answer that first question.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. Ultimately, both of you kind of seem to gravitate towards, the two coming together and using them both for different purposes, but merging them because they are very much compatible. It's not really just the one or the other. I mean, one of the questions I have, and probably a lot of prospects that are looking at web personalization for the first time are wondering kind of where do I start? And I think part of the reason we see more of an emphasis on email right now is because, well, marketing automation is becoming more popular, and if you see, the way that a lot of that is done is based on rules-based, manual, prescriptive approach as opposed to a completely automated or mostly automated one. So I think part of it is simply what people are familiar with, and it's a similar approach to email now or web now as a result. But you're absolutely right. When we're talking about scale, where do you have greater scale? Email, which is further down your funnel, or much higher up on your website. And there's simply so many more people at that higher stage in the funnel where you're hitting greater scale. And if you can reach those people in a more personalized way, then you're going to make them. You're going to allow them to progress further down the funnel at a greater rate. So good. We do have a question for the survey. Wendy, if you could turn it over to them. I quickly wanted to see kind of how people are using this today, and it may be that a lot of people are not necessarily using web personalization yet today, or only in a very limited sense, but we have the same question for our audience, and it'd be great to get their insight.
So audience, I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll question right now and go ahead and vote. The question is, do you use a primarily rules-based approach, or is it mostly automated via AI or machine learning? And go ahead and vote now. Hey, Andrew, I took the liberty of launching while we had the agenda up. Do you do some form of web personalization today? So while the audience is voting on the new question, let's talk about the results on the old question. About 38% of our audience today said that they don't have any personalization right now on the web. 31% said we're in the planning stages. 23% said, yes, we do a little bit, but we want to ramp up more. And 8% said we have a fully robust personalization strategy. It sounds like our audience knows their mind pretty well. Not anybody has said that they were not sure. So does that surprise you, Andrew?
You know, not really, because especially as we look at personalization as a general category, even for those using some form of email personalization, which was the most common, it's still very much at the beginning of kind of the learning curve and the adoption curve. We're very much still crossing that chasm, and many people still see it as something for only the big enterprises to be doing. We did find that more smaller companies are beginning to use some form of web personalization. They aren't necessarily very advanced or very educated yet. But we expect this to grow for a variety of reasons that we'll continue to touch on over the rest of the webinar.
You know, Andrew, if I could jump in there too, I would argue that even at the enterprise and large enterprise level, what you find most commonly is, especially if you look behind the scenes, there's been an over-rotation on technology.
Yep.
You know, it's interesting, you know, the report that VB put out, which is fantastic, shows that especially like Adobe is very prominent throughout places. And you'll find that besides things like content management and stuff, you also have test and target, which is for optimization and some of the rule-based targeting. And my experience is that there's been a huge over-rotation in technology where there's not only often multiple technologies that overlap, but where they don't overlap, where you have complementary tools. And there is a lot of complementary tools in personalization, and it's a very complex environment. Our vendors have not made it easy sometimes, but it's three things that I find that they really struggle with. One is orchestration. How do these tools work together? Two, how do I scale it up, right? You find there's a lot of testing and trying going on, and I think that comes out in that survey quite a bit. You know, there's a few people with a fully fleshed out strategy, but a lot are not yet or just starting. And then the last one is industrialization, because even after you've got the tools in place, you know how they work together, and you start to run your test, and you start to actually see that this stuff is working, and you feel like you can scale it up, if it's not baked into the operations of the business, every time a new product page is launched, every time a new content page is launched, what you find is that after a while, it just starts to die on the vine. And so it's those three things that we kind of look at: orchestration across the tools, scaling it up, because that's a lot harder than it sounds, because it actually means building out your own operating model around it, treating it as a true platform. And then that last one is, it's the industrialization, which is really about baking it into the various processes to ensure the rest of the business is made this part of their everyday, operations.
Yeah, and a lot of people will. I was just going to say, I mean, a lot of people start with a tool like Optimizely, and it's, A/B testing may be considered kind of the front end of personalization, but it's really not what most people would consider true personalization. So there's definitely a wide spectrum of what's possible today. Amber, please go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Amber. I'm sorry.
No, I actually was just going to say I completely agree with your points, Jared. I think that is particularly true once you start looking at the enterprises and large enterprises. The things that I've seen be the most successful are pilots that are started in some sort of a central piece of the organization where they deploy a pilot. see how it works, and then start to onboard other teams once they see the successfulness, hopefully, the success of that pilot. When you're talking about a smaller business, now the resources might be lighter, or those small businesses may think that their resources are lighter, but actually being able to deploy, that orchestration, scaling, and then that industrialization, those 3 points, Jeriad, I think are really, really key. And those can actually be easier for a small or mid-sized business to deploy because you have fewer people you need to bring on board, potentially smaller web property, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and less data to contend with.
I was going to make. I think that's a really good point. I often find that digital as a whole, especially in the enterprise level, when you find it succeeding, it's because digital is somewhat siloed off from the rest of the business. And one of the concepts, one of the pivots that we really are encouraging companies to think about is most of the time we hear of digital as a channel, and anybody who's in a large enterprise knows what that means. My channel, and this is not all of them, but the majority of them will say, well, digital's great, it's critical, we got to succeed in it, but by the way, it's 10 to 15% of my business. When you turn that around and call that your digital store or your digital branch or your digital agent or whatever it may be, it changes the game because then it's your biggest store, it's your biggest agent, it's your biggest branch, and there's no excuse for not using data to personalize it. But it's just the trade-off, right? Because it's siloed, we see great experimentation going on, great ideas are happening because the rest of the business isn't always paying attention. But the trade-off is the ability to scale it up. And I think that's a great point Amber's bringing up because when you are often in a small business, you aren't having to deal with all the extra weight of trying to get the rest of the business online to do this. And that is where the big businesses even succeed, is when it's really treated as a small group that's able to be siloed off and make it happen.
Yeah, great points on both ends. So looking at these votes here, we have somewhat small sample size, but about a quarter are saying that we don't personalize. The majority, 38%, are saying a hybrid of both, and then 31% are saying a rules-based approach. I would say that more are doing a rules-based approach today. A hybrid approach is becoming more common, and in fact, we can take a look at some of our own survey data. And from what we found, B2B companies tend to rely more on rules-based segmentation, and B2C companies, especially in retail or publishers and media, that have kind of a large number of products or stories to personalize, tend to rely more on adaptive or automated approaches. And if you look at the data here, it's somewhat skewed toward a rules-based approach. But what's particularly interesting is that a very large number use both, and that number is substantial. We believe it'll only grow because the fact is the two really are complementary, exactly what we've been talking about. So let's move on to our next question here. This is a really interesting one because even within web personalization, there's kind of the top of the funnel and further down in terms of the visitors and audience that you don't know anything about, the completely anonymous ones, versus the ones that have engaged with your property for some time and all the way down at the bottom of the funnel on the website, have converted or otherwise given you an email address and additional information. So, when should companies focus on anonymous versus known visitors or users, and should certain companies focus on one more than the other?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the first shot at this one. This is kind of a tough question because it really depends on the channel, which I know is a key aspect of the VB report because personalization can exist in all of them. If I'm generating demand and it's about search engine marketing and trying to get, tying search intent to what I know about them to personalize the experience when they land on a page, clearly the anonymous data is critical. And it's why you've seen a lot of the DMPs initially start out being more of a third-party append than what the real visual, realization of what a DMP should be. But there is always, in my opinion, if I know who someone is, that data is by far the most powerful data I have. More powerful than any data I can pin via third-party or et cetera. Some of the cookie data that's out there is fantastic because you have an idea of maybe what someone else is shopping for. But we have to know that data is somewhat incomplete too. something that we talked about in the Twitter chat earlier this week, which I think is critical here, is I would actually argue when you have the option, it's known visitor data is the most powerful, but it's not what people buy or consume, it's why. So it's not the product that I choose or the page that I choose to read, it's why I pick those, which comes down to its attributes, its features, its ingredients, its branding attributes. It's all of those things. We call that the customer genome. It's the idea of decomposing every digital interaction, breaking that down, because when we start to realize that why I picked up that Burt's Bees baby shampoo when I was in the grocery store, I didn't just pick it, I picked it over other products. And it was because of the packaging or the brand or the features or that it was lavender scented or aloe based or whatever. When we get to that, we kind of release ourselves of the historical view of personalization, right? It's not limited by selection or inventory levels. It's really more about my true preferences, passions, or interests, which not only allows me to be more personalized, whether it's in the communication of the product, but it even informs me about new stuff to create. And we're seeing this more in the media industry than others. I don't know if we have anybody who's on this call from the media industry, but they have been trailblazing this. And I mean, you look at someone like a Netflix or an iTunes and how they've been developing this kind of level of data to personalize, and how Netflix is now creating original content from this, which is fantastic, right? I mean, they went from really just being a content distributor to creating original content because they were sitting on a gold mine of data. Well, the truth is most industries have that. It just takes a more creative exercise to get to that level of information. So, long-winded answer, definitely known visitor when it's available, but I would argue that the majority of companies I've seen really are stuck at the what people are buying or what they're choosing or what they are consuming and not trying to get to the why, even though they're sitting on that data.
Yeah, I want to come back to the data question in a moment. That's in large part what the third and final question is about. But Amber, I wanted to get your take as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jared's points. I think one thing that we focus on at Metia is our customers. We're obsessively focused on them, and what that means is that we take their experience and their customer journey into play when we are providing suggestions and solutions to our clients. For this particular question, I think for us, it sort of maps back to what that customer journey is. So understanding and knowing what your buyer's life cycle is, and then being able to tailor the content and experience based on which stage in that buying process they are. It obviously is more complex if you're in a typical B2B scenario because the life cycle tends to be much longer. The decision-making points and process is a lot more robust than you would see in a B2C scenario. But regardless of B2B or B2C, the earlier your customer is in the buying cycle, I would argue the less information specific to them you need to know if you really are talking about practically being able to collect their information. The closer they get to a sale, and of course if this is a buying cycle for B2C, it could be a lot shorter than it would be in B2B. But the closer you get, the more you want to know about them. Eventually, you want to know some sort of PII, so that the individual, whoever it is that you're working with, by the time they come to purchase. And there's that requirement in B2B to know who it is that you're working with, at least from a company or account level. In B2C, however, it's quite possible you could have a sale from somebody who never fully interacted with your brand. I think Jeriad brought up the point where somebody goes and buys Burt's Bees in the grocery store. That could be related to some sort of a customer journey that includes digital and offline and media channels. And in those instances, understanding what that customer journey is throughout their entire buying cycle, wherever they may interact with your brand, is really important. Otherwise, you're losing that ability to provide future personalization for those repeat sales and that engagement with that customer.
I have to say, too, I love this B2C, B2B split that Amber's bringing up. What I've seen, I'm curious about what you think about this, Amber. Usually what we're seeing is that the SMB side of B2Bs are slowly, and well, I shouldn't say slowly, rapidly moving towards a B2C type of solution because it's more cost effective to serve. Mm-hmm. And those buyers are often, they're B2C on their regular life, and so they're used to the experience of help me make decisions. You should make this easier for me. The golden rule is make it easy for me to buy and find what I'm looking for. But as you move up the scale away from SMB, and you're really talking about more sales engagement than, say, like marketing, I think the model completely changes, right? So it's less about replacing the sales rep. Far from it. It's really about how do you actually enable the sales rep in a more personalized way to engage with their clients. But I'm curious if you've seen that SMB side leaning back towards almost trying to mimic and being forced to the Amazon model, and we're seeing like how certain people in the B2C space are now bleeding over into the B2B world and starting to take their business away, which is forcing that.
Yeah. I think definitely the buying process for an SMB in a B2B cycle is a lot simpler than something in it, even once you start getting mid-size, certainly to the enterprise level. And the mindset of the buyer is not any different than the mindset of a consumer. If I am at a small organization, even a micro organization, I want a new computer. My process for selecting and purchasing that computer is probably going to be very similar to the process that I have for purchasing something for myself personally. In fact, I might choose the same machine based on what I do and the overlap that you have between your work and personal life. And so I think absolutely one of the things that we focus on for when we are trying to enable that sales enablement when you get to those larger enterprises in B2B is making sure that is a fully fluid function and that marketing is really helping with sales and it's a fluid engine. It's no longer marketing versus sales or marketing versus IT or whatever it may be. It really has to be all continuous and supportive in all areas.
Yeah, I like, Amber, that you related it back to the customer journey and every company's customer journey being obviously different. And so, I mean, as a company thinks about what their customer journey looks like, I mean, this is a model that I used in a previous report on customer identity. But as we engage with our customers, we learn more about them. We have more data about the ones further down the funnel, like you said, than those at the top, and that's the way it should be. And plus, for many companies today, I mean, a majority of their revenue comes from their existing customer base, and that makes known customers low-hanging fruit, relatively speaking, when it comes to delivering a lot of personalization because there's more data and there's a lot of value there. But then there are more customers at the top of that funnel, and so there's a prioritization there as well. And I mean, even if you think about B2B, yes, you typically want more information about those people, especially as you approach the sales end of things. But I mean, a company like Demandbase is doing most of their business based on simply an address book, essentially, of IP addresses and the ability to personalize based on anonymous IP addresses associated with certain businesses. And so they might not know who the individual is, but getting an idea of what company is on their site and tailoring even small things to that specific vertical are very effective. And they've got their own case studies, just like every other personalization vendor. But it totally depends on what your priority is and where in the funnel that is.
By the way, I think great, because I love this view, one of the things that we're seeing people starting to build, and I'm not going to claim that anyone's extremely mature at it least that I've seen, but everybody's heading down this path as fast as they can, is starting to create a universal ID framework to tie cookies to known customers, right? Especially your first-party cookies, because if I send an email out with a pixel in there, a very good chance I can connect the two worlds together. And that way that when Jeriad comes to the page and Jeriad doesn't authenticate, but he's coming to check stuff out, I don't forget who he is just because, he forgot to sign in or something. And that doesn't mean you want to get into any kind of creepiness kind of thing, but you do want to remember or be able to tie those worlds together as best you can. And so there is no 100% match, but creating that framework to tie those together as much as possible and combining that also with certain providers who are starting to connect across device IDs. You look what Facebook can do with their Atlas platform, where they can know you across devices you're signed into. We're starting to finally see this stuff start to get connected.
Yeah, and we're starting to see this concept of progressive profiling. Profiling from the time that you are totally anonymous and first hit a website, or maybe when you first click through something, an advertisement, to begin to piece together, the various pieces of information you have, and then tie them together as those data points become available. And a variety of vendors from really different industries are starting to do this now. Again, because different channels are melding together, and the fact that the customer journey, as we've been talking about, crosses these different channels. Vendors that were focused on one specific channel before are now seeing the opportunity to tie things together. So it's kind of fascinating on the vendor side as well to see so many different vendors competing, often now offering competitive features, even though they started in very different places. When we asked our audience, the vendors that we surveyed for this research, their breakdown was actually mostly anonymous. So most of the web personalization vendors, and we looked at about 40 of them, are actually focused, almost 2/3 of them are focused on the anonymous side, at least primarily. Some of them certainly are, a number of them are focused on both in different ways, and a lot of them do have progressive profiling capabilities. But many of them are focused on the behavioral data as opposed to necessarily the profile data. And that's a really interesting trend as well, because that data is simply so rich that it can't be ignored. Just because once you know and have that PII, that personally identifiable information, that is very valuable, especially because then you can email them, and email is a proven ROI channel. But there's so much rich data that's available just from the behaviors before you even know who someone is. And there are a variety of companies that are now using that type of behavioral data to personalize not just the website, but a variety of other channels as well. And new technologies like DMPs are making that available. It's very interesting. So to go to our third question here. Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Andrew, just real quickly on that previous slide, just to kind of add a little light to it. This isn't surprising in the sense that most people start off with personalization. We talked about tools like Optimizely, Adobe's Test and Target, are really around landing pages. They're very, time-oriented, owned by marketing, and they have a little bit more control over it. You're not having to try to deal with the whole entire e-commerce organization yet. So it's not surprising to see that, because it's usually in the optimization side of personalization, or the testing, right? We think of like A/B testing, multivariate testing. However, I think that known side is about to really start growing very rapidly. You look at the people who are in the space, companies like Rich Relevance, what they're able to do is plug into an e-commerce environment, basically take that data, house it for you, and start providing personalized recommendations very rapidly. It's a different area of personalization, but it's personalized product recommendations, content recommendations, on-site search. But Forrester just showed a report where they had a return on investment as fast as 2 months. So I think we're going to see the known rapidly grow and start to overtake this. But it's not surprising to see the anonymous. I think that is more related to landing page optimization, which is something that is where most people begin.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that is where most people begin. And yet I feel like it's going to be a combination of both is the most common going forward, just because
that's a good point. Yeah.
The ability to tie the two together is so critical as well. I mean, the ability to understand someone from the moment they hit your site, and then tie that once you get the known information. I mean, the two together is so powerful. All right, so let's go on to the final question here, and this is one we've touched on throughout, but what types of data should companies focus on, and how much data is necessary for effective personalization? And again, Jared, I refer back to that great comment you made on our Twitter chat about moving on from the what someone did to the why, and understanding that motivation and context is really key to getting real insight rather than just measuring certain activity. So in that spirit, I mean, how do you determine what data matters? And obviously we've kind of said it depends, but what should a company focus on?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two things. So the first is that what matters you determine through testing. The beauty of digital, and I know we have more channels than just digital here because personalization can happen in so many ways, but whether it's a kiosk, e-commerce platform, mobile app, email, whatever, the ability to learn rapidly. I mean, this is something we're all culturally getting used to. I mean, 5-10 years ago, you wanted to run a test, you'd run it in your catalog or whatever and hope that next year you remember your insights. Now all of a sudden we're learning real time and starting to create tailored, optimized experiences based on who people are as the test is running, right? So it's a completely different world. So my argument is, although it sometimes takes more advanced technologies to complement the personalization stuff, you really should test your way into figuring out what works. However, you can't test stuff you don't have. And so it gets back to that what versus the why. If I'm not capturing those attributes of the why, I can't test to see if those really make a difference, right? And that goes from, and I'll, just from my own personal experience, when you're coming into a site for personalization, the DMP stuff is very valuable. I would argue that search intent is equally invaluable. If that stuff's not being used to tailor the experience, that's a big miss. And that's everything from just mentioning the brand or not mentioning the brand. It tells you a lot about how you should tailor your communications when they come to your site or your mobile app or whatever. And then if you flip that around and you look at the engagement side of it, this gets to the why part. It's why. Am I a brand loyalist with Burt's Bees? Am I into lavender-scented products? Am I looking for anti-aging products? Am I hypoallergenic? Do I have kale in my diet? These are things that influence the things we buy. There was a great question by Shelley Swanbach, who's the COO of our Accenture digital business today, about how personalization addresses things like gender personalization. And gender is always should be a factor into this, but I think you actually pick up the greater nuances of people's preferences through understanding why they're picking things. And that's not necessarily just the ingredients and stuff, but it's also that they're into personal expression of wealth, price sensitive, into salty foods. And the only way you get that is to start breaking down those interactions so you can understand why the choices I'm making are different from other people. So first part of the question, yeah, it's about testing it, but you can't test what you don't have. And I think we haven't gotten creative enough with the data that we're sitting on top of as gold mines. And often we're too quickly to run to, average visits to the site and category, spend in a specific category when really the information's another level deeper. And you combine that with things like search intent with the full spectrum, I think there's a lot of power there that's just untapped.
Yeah, I agree. Amber, what do you think?
I love this question because as a marketer, I love data, but I think that sometimes collecting too much data and using that data can come off as creepy, particularly to the consumer side, and I think Jared brought that point up as well. But when a lot of people think about web personalization, if they're new to that idea, potentially leaning towards thinking that means profile data. And profile data is important, and I would say it's the cornerstone of web personalization. It's something that's been around for a while. It's something marketers have been using to be able to personalize those web experiences. However, tools and technologies that are available now enable us to also look at that behavioral data. And the behavioral data allows you to determine the behaviors of your customers so you can then continue to customize or tailor those experiences to them. So I'm going to go off of the Burt's Bees example and talk about Sephora for a moment. It's a brand I love from both a consumer perspective and a marketer's perspective. As a marketer, I really, really appreciate the way that they've integrated the experience you might expect in the store to the one that you receive online as well. They have a wonderful, great loyalty program and have for a long time had a great customer experience all based on that web personalization. In this case, it looks like they've used that loyalty program and the data that they collect through it to help build that personalized experience. So at the base level, if you're not familiar, you sign up, you collect points through purchases, and you can get free products once you reach a certain level. So that's a great loyalty experience. However, you can also personalize your own experience based on your different information about yourself, so your skin tone, type, hair and eye color, etc. And then they start to provide you with recommendations on what different products would work well for you. They also track your most frequent purchases. So you can order something that you've used before. I have 5 or so products that I order on a regular basis, and so I get refills, so to speak, on those products. And they put it front and center in your profile, so you only have to hit one button to be able to purchase it, add it to your cart, and can complete that transaction. Then they're also using predictive technology to suggest recommendations based on similar customers and their purchases. They then take that personalization and carry it through to email and offer other product recommendations, reviews, and more through that email relationship with their customers, which I think is a really great tie-in, taking web personalization, tying it into email, and of course not just using email to personalize based on your first name, but using it based on the information that they have about you in your profile. Sephora would obviously have some personalization if all they did was track your purchases, and that would still be a nice experience for customers, but it's not necessary for them to make a sale. And I think that that's a really interesting way to look at that, where they've integrated that profile data with the behavioral data and offered up a really great experience for the customers, especially those that are repeat customers of those brand loyalists, building up those brand loyalists based really purely on what they initiated as a customer loyalty program in the beginning.
Yeah, it's a great example. I like both of them. And on the flip side, it's funny. I was actually walking the dog with my wife earlier this morning, and she was talking about buying boots online from Liz Taylor, and she said she found a pair that she really liked, but then the recommendation came up for another pair that was very similar. And she said, well, with one, I was thinking about buying it, but two, it was too much to think about, so I closed it. So on the one hand, personalization is about something like collaborative filtering, the ability to show, what other people might have liked that's similar, or similar items generally. And yet, only by testing over time, to Jeriad's point, do you really learn how effective things are. Now, generally, I'm guessing that kind of a recommendation is effective. It's just that some people then, certain types of users, get kind of overwhelmed with analysis paralysis, and that's my wife in this case. So there are kind of a variety of data points along the way, not just how you personalize, but then learning what those methods actually bring you. And to that point, I mean, we have a little bit of data here. When we previously asked marketers doing any kind of personalization, what kind of data they were using, well, there's a wide variety, and some certainly stand out as most common, but some can also be very specific. So another example, I talked to the head of content at a company called Baby Center. For many of you who have children, you'll be familiar. It's a membership site with a huge knowledge base for parents. And they're primarily interested in really just one single, he called it a golden data point, and that's the date of birth of your child. Because from there, they can extrapolate everything else they need throughout the rest of the course of the baby's life, and then be time relevant at every point. And yet a company like Nike doesn't care anything about that. They just want to know maybe what sport you play or your shoe size, and Cisco wants to know if your company is in the market for like a data center. So it's really most important to start with what your own company goals are and what data points align to those goals, and then think about what data points and what breadcrumbs lead to that context that you need. And before we get to some Q&A here, I know we're running down on time, but one of the most interesting things I've found in the course of this research is the value of behavioral data, and more people talking about behavioral data than I've ever noticed before. And you really get behavioral data only through the website and mobile app interactions. So the browsing behavior, where you're clicking on a site, the time you spend on certain pages, even the time you spend kind of hovering your mouse over a product, all of that can be captured and be used even at an anonymous level, but also tied to a known ID to help understand context better. And today, most personalization efforts are based on history and profile data, but going forward, I expect a greater mix of behavioral data to get thrown in there. and to be used not only for web personalization, but used for greater personalization in other channels as well.
Andrew, if I could make a quick comment too around, because Amber brought up a really good point around the creepiness thing, and I know some people get a little hesitant. It's a common question I get asked about is, where's that creepiness line at, right? And much of that came out of large companies who were using that data to try to sell it or to try to use it for advertising. But when you actually look at someone like an Amazon, right, who has your credit card information, who knows all your purchase history and even knows where your parents live, most people don't bat an eye. You don't have to be a millennial to appreciate what they're doing there, because the data that they're taking is meant to be used as a service back to you. I don't want to have to type in my credit card again. I don't want to have to remember the shipping address for my aunt. And so the golden rule for that, putting the compliance and privacy issues aside for a second, is if you're using the data to enhance the experience for me, then it's a good thing. Because what personalization should be doing is making it easier for me to find what I'm looking for and to engage. If you're making that easier for me, great. If you're not, then why am I giving this to you to begin with? And I think to that point, sometimes we collect data, and I think Amber was bringing it up. We run around trying to collect data without actually really thinking through what the intent of it is for, and that's when it can get a little bit questionable. Why are you asking this? But again, there's plenty of brands out there who have shown that if you share data with me, I can improve the experience, and they've changed the expectations of the customer base because of that. So just wanted to add that in, because it is a unique area that a lot of people struggle with. So.
Yeah, the question of privacy always comes up as it relates to personalization, and it's a very valid point. I mean, we've been able to cross that creepy line with very limited data for a long time. I mean, we've gotten data from like email open rates for decades, right? And the ability to say, hey, I saw you just open my email. I know it's late at night, but maybe you're interested in this. Like, you know, you could very easily cross that creepy line with only a very limited amount of data. So it's not even the amount of data that is being collected, it's how it's used. And I like that point, that the golden rule is about making it helpful and valuable. Because if it's not, then why are you doing it?
Hey guys, I'm going to jump in here because we're about 2 minutes to the end of the hour, and I know that we've got a lot of audience questions here. So I'm going to broach this question. It's been a great discussion. I wish we could go another hour. But I'm going to broach this question. I'm going to start with Amber. Amber, can you give us some tips on how do you go about personalization for anonymous users when we know little or nothing about this user? What do you think?
So I think the approach for that needs to be paying attention to your analytics and being able to go back to that first question we talked about with that manual personalization and create some manual rules around what you would like to personalize based on the data that you're able to collect. So even when someone's anonymous, you still are collecting web data, and you can make some educated guesses, let's say, on what their behaviors mean and what you might be able to do. And then the key is really to keep paying attention to that data and continue to optimize based on the information that you have. It's not any different really than any personalization and testing and optimization that you would be doing within email. And because there's a huge majority of people who are doing email personalization right now, even if it's just that first name, it's, you know, if you've been involved in that, you understand that if you pay attention to the data, it will tell you things that you didn't necessarily know, and it doesn't get in the way that it's anonymous data only. It helps you build your case. Of course, you have to take some risks, but the great thing about digital is that it all is fluid, and you can make some sort of quick fails to be able to learn and move forward.
Well said. Thanks, Amber. And Jared, anything to add quickly?
No, I think that nailed it.
I think it did too. Andrew, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Well, the final thoughts would be on the report itself. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of the questions. I'm glad we had a fantastic conversation here. But the report itself actually talks about upwards of 50 vendors, has industry benchmarks and 52 charts and graphs, et cetera. So as you think about how to approach personalization, there's a lot of information, how to get started, and then what vendors might be most relevant. And I think that kind of data is not easy to find, which is part of the reason we wanted to put together the report. So I hope that it's helpful for you. It's available at insight.venturebeat.com.
Absolutely, and then there's also, remember audience, there's also actually a bonus in the attachments area where you can get 50% off just because you attended this webinar. So 50% off link out there as well. And if I apologize to those audience questions that we have still out in the queue that we didn't have time for, but I encourage you to reach out to Andrew, Amber, and Jared via Twitter or other social media to keep the conversation going. We'll also be chatting later today on #VB webinars as well as every Thursday. So if you want to reach out to us, we'll be there as well. On behalf of our guests, Amber Whiteman, VP of Client Service at Metia, Jeriad Zoghby, Managing Director of Global Personalization at Accenture, and Andrew Jones from VB Insight, thank you for attending today's webcast, Website Personalization, Why You Can't Afford Not to Get Personal, brought to you by VentureBeat Insight and Autopilot. I'm Wendy Schuchart. I'm signing off for VentureBeat. I want to thank Autopilot for bringing this content to us today. This webcast is copyright 2015 by VentureBeat. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by VentureBeat Insight and Autopilot, who are solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinion. Thanks so much for attending today, and have a great day.